Let's make this strawberry wreath together. Here we have a standard round grapevine that I got from Michael's. It's just a 16-inch round grapevine and a sign, a metal sign that I got from a wholesaler. I just used the holes that already existed. I made it a little bit cockeyed to the side, and eventually you'll see that I put in flowers and I realized that I needed to drop that sign down lower. And so all I did was drop it down lower so that the bottom part of the sign does cover up some of that bottom part of the grapevine. You can see where I'm waving to show you where I'm going to put the flowers. So it's going to be in a crescent over the top part of the wreath. I'm starting off with greenery. I'm using ferns for now, and I'm just kind of laying out my base and my perimeter. It's all wired, so I bend it the way that I want it. I want it to droop on the sign. I want it to look like this is in a bed of an overgrown strawberry garden. So it's kind of my vision, but you can certainly keep it as neat and tidy as you want. And I go in with these ferns, and then I follow up with a second greenery before we go into the bow. Okay, so here I'm adding in that second greenery, and you'll notice that I'll lift up some of the ferns that's already there and place the new greenery in. And I do that so that it has a nice layered look and it looks like it grew in nature, right? Even though we're making an artificial wreath, we do want it to look somewhat real, or I do. So that's what I do. You will notice that there are two directions that we're going in with our greenery, and then we'll follow that up with the same thing with our flowers. You can see that there's the top portion of the wreath that we're going in a clockwise motion of how we're putting our things, our elements in, and then you can see that there's a point where we move and we go counterclockwise. That point in between those two directions is what's called a transition point. You can see some of the ferns, kind of the smaller ferns, the lighter ferns sticking up there. That's that transition point. That's where we will put a bow, and it will hide that change of direction. But you do want it to look like things are growing kind of with gravity and with nature. And so you will have where some of your greenery goes in one direction and flowers, and some of your elements go in another. And that point in between is that transition point. So just make sure you think about how you're hiding that, whether it's with flowers or with ribbon. We're going to use a bow, but you can certainly use flowers. All right, speaking of bow, here we go. Ribbon. I chose 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 ribbons, y'all. So I have 1 4-inch ribbon, really nice sturdy burlap. I have 3 2.5-inch, and then I have 1 small 7/8 inch, and it's a Swiss dot. I love that. So you can see how we're kind of mixing it up, but it's mostly all reds and strawberries, and that strawberry ribbon is what brings in the little bit of pink that we decided to use because it's got a pink gingham in the background. So here we go, just deciding how we're gonna build out a bow and what that's gonna look like and what the tails are gonna look like. And you're gonna see me mess with this bow a lot, and I will do that throughout the whole design. I reckon you do too. But I'm just deciding sizes of my loops, and then I'll start out with my base bow, and I'll use my biggest ribbon, this 4-inch, and then I'll build it up from there. And I just kind of alternate in what other colors and patterns that I want to bring in, and how many loops I want to use. Typically I use 2 of each, but sometimes if it's a pattern I want to really bring out, I'll use 4. So behind the 4-inch burlap and red stripe, I decided to go in with this Farrah Silk red and white Swiss dot. Thought it was a really nice contrast behind it, and you can see I'm just building it out in the same manner. As I build my bow, when I make my loops and get them where I want them, when I get to the middle, I twist to get the underside of the ribbon so that when I loop it back over, I have the pretty side on the top. I keep the tails somewhat the same length, but not really. I'm not real into even Annie, but you can certainly do them the way that you want to. And then when I brought out the strawberry ribbon, I realized that it wasn't as stiff as some of that really nice designer ribbon. So I decided to make those tails kind of more floppy tails. So you saw I moved the tails to the bottom of my hand, not to the top when I started the bow, just like I did the other loops. And this strawberry ribbon, I really wanted to repeat because it's the whole theme of the wreath. So this is the one ribbon that I did 4 loops with instead of just 2. And again, get to the middle, twist, get the underside of the ribbon, so that when you bring it back over, you have the pretty side as a loop. And I'm constantly just making sure that my wires are not scrunched up and that middle is nice and stacked on top of each other. And believe me, by now my hand is hurting y'all, but you gotta bear through it, right? To build that beautiful bow. This mesh ribbon here doesn't really add like a whole lot as far as like different color or anything like that, but it's just such a different texture, and sometimes that's a really nice thing to add into your bows. It's just something that has a different texture, and I think it adds a little bit of like a farmhousey element. So I really enjoy adding that in. Sometimes you can see through it. It's like that chicken wiry-ish kind of look. And then we follow it up with the final thin ribbon. And I keep my tails long on some of these just because I'm gonna decide later how short I want them, and you'll see as I build out the wreath, I cut things, you know, I'll start out with one size, and then as I put some flowers on, I decide I want them shorter, and so you'll see. So I encourage you to keep them a little bit long when you first build the bow, but no, you know, you can cut all of that shorter as you build it out and see that your flowers need space too. All right, so there's the finished bow, and I love zip ties. So I use one zip tie to keep it together, and then once I have that zip tie pretty much on there, but not all the way snug, I put a really long zip tie behind it so that that's what I attach it onto the wreath. And then I cinch that zip tie that's holding the bow together really, really tight, and then I have that long zip tie to attach it on. So there you see it. And y'all, I will tell you, I know we started this and I already had that sign in, and you don't see all the times I wrestle with that sign, but any wreath maker will tell you the 2 most difficult things to do are attach a sign or a bow, or really just any attachment, let's just put it that way, to a wreath. So if you have to fuss with it or fiddle with it, that is completely normal, and it's just ribbon, y'all. So you can see me, I move these bows and loops around, and I change where the tails are probably 3 times by the time I finish this wreath. So do the same. I encourage you to do the same so that you can get a look at where the ribbon and patterns and things are and where you want your flowers as you start to build that part out. And like I said, if you don't like it, then you just change it. So you can see I didn't like where my tails were, so I moved them over to this side. Watch later in the wreath, I don't like where those are when I'm starting to put my flowers in, so I move them back over. So again, you have flexibility to do these things with your bow. I just want to encourage you to play with that until you love it. Okay, y'all, we fiddled with that bow a lot, and you can see I curled those tails. I used just an old mesh tube holder. If you don't have that, I would say use an aluminum foil tube. And here I'm just starting in with flowers. I'm going to go with my biggest flowers to my smallest. My biggest happen to be the big white magnolias, and then I move into the red cabbage roses. And then that bush came with some smaller little pops of hydrangea with a little bit of fern on it. And I used those as well because they were just beautiful. And then I brought in a pink ranunculus. So you can see how I'm building those all out when I get to all of the flowers. And what you see here is these magnolias. I got them from Michael's, and they're cute and all, but I steamed them to try to get them to open more, and still they were floppy. I don't like it when you can't see that it's a magnolia because all of the petals flop in. So I am hot gluing some of the top petals to the back petals so that it stays open. So it's just one way to kind of fix how that looks. There's really no rhyme or reason of why I'm putting, 2 magnolias in one place and only one on the other. But just for the most part, I'm just trying to work in somewhat of angles. So, diagonals, angles, and if I can, work in triangles. I end up adding in a 4th magnolia. So, I'm breaking the whole rule of a triangle where I'm having 3 points, I'm adding in a 4th, but it really needed some white out by that bow. So don't get carried away with all the rules, but in general, it does help you design because I use a lot of those as how I started to build this whole thing out. So. Okay, here we're adding in those red cabbage roses. They add a really nice pop of red, and you can see I'm leaving a space in between there for the pink ranunculus. So then that way we really have a cute red, white, and pink flower burst kind of right there. And the only thing I just keep trying to be careful with is that you can still tell it's a magnolia, and that those petals kind of work with the flowers that are there and look like they're grown together, not smushed. So that's the challenge, grown together, not smushed. I fail sometimes at that, but I keep coming back to it and trying to work on it. Okay, you can just see I'm working both sides of the wreath, where I add in some of the flowers on the top side, then I come and do the same on the bottom side. And then as I had the pink and the red and the white together, I remembered that I had these really soft pink and white ranunculuses that matched perfectly. I got them from Walmart, so I just added them into the piece. I think it works out perfectly. You can see the flowers also get worked in as close to the bow and also behind the bow as possible. Also the greenery, it helps supports the bow, brings it all together. And then also in the bow, so don't forget about that, adding greenery that comes out of the loops and some of the tails, putting flowers in the center. It's always a really nice touch, and also hides the mechanics of your bow. So you can see here by now how many times we have fluffed the bow, changed the bow, shortened some of the tails on the bow, also extended the wreath. So both of the sides have been extended longer than how we originally started. And all of that is perfectly normal. As you get things on there and you start to see how it looks, you'll build it out. So once you have all of the big flowers and all of your main greenery, you basically have your shape, all of the things, right? Now you go in with what's called filler flowers. So I'm using some small red filler flower that has some berries on it because, again, I'm making strawberry wreath, so I feel like berries kind of goes with that. It also has wispy ferns on it that matches already the greenery that I used. So I'm using some red to pop in some red, but there's also some little light and airy white that I popped in as well. So what you really want to do is pick out flowers, some big, some medium sized, mix them up a little bit, and then once you have them placed, you go back and just kind of fill out your little gaps and holes with some of that filler flower. So that's that white filler flower I'm working with there. You can see that I decide I didn't want white next to the white magnolia, and so I move it around. You can do the same. Just ripped it out, dipped it back in the hot glue, and then found a new home for it. It's easy. A little tip for you is if you get hot glue on something that you don't really want it on or it's excessive, just let it dry. Don't burn yourself or anything unless you can and grab something that can get a hot glue drip. But other than that, just let it drip, let it dry, and then take a heating tool and heat it up, and then you can wipe it off of whatever it's on. So if it fell on a leaf or on your ribbon or on the sign, all of that is fixable. But it's easier to fix it and it won't hurt you if you just let it dry and use a heating tool. So a heating tool can be a hair dryer or just a heating gun, if you use them to dry any painting or anything like that you do. But it could be as simple as just a hair dryer. All right, so here you have it. I think I'm actually finally pleased. So here is the finished product. There is our strawberry wreath. Hope you enjoyed, y'all. And I hope you're inspired to make one of your own. Subscribe to my page for more home and holiday decor.